Which countries in the world are energy independent? Today I will try to answer this question and present our rating of countries in the world by energy independence.
Most often, a country's energy independence is associated with having sufficient oil. However, things are somewhat more complicated since consumers need a wide variety of energy products.
In our opinion, the most important indicators of energy independence are consumers' access to energy products that meet modern energy consumption standards and are produced from their own resources.
In other words, energy independence requires not only the primary energy resources but also the developed infrastructure for their processing into usable energy forms, such as gasoline or diesel fuel, electricity or heat, and subsequent delivery to consumers. It is also important to recognize that the share of primary resources by fuel type in global energy consumption is roughly as follows: crude oil 34%, coal 29%, natural gas 26%, renewable less than 7%, and nuclear less than 5%.
To rank the countries of the world by energy independence, we first selected countries based on how well they align with our definition of energy independence.
For this, we used recent statistical data primarily from the US Energy Information Administration and other publicly available sources. Additionally, in our study, we applied an acceptable deviation level of 10% between negative and acceptable indicators, with a few justified exceptions where the deviation was extended to 15%.
Let's start by evaluating the level of primary energy. It is obvious that if a country's consumption of primary energy exceeds its production, it cannot be considered energy independent.
The map shows the ratio of primary energy production to consumption in countries around the world. Most countries in Europe, as well as in South and East Asia, are not energy independent, as their consumption of primary resources exceeds their production. The greatest imbalance is seen in countries like Japan, South Korea, Spain, Italy, and Turkey. This group also includes Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, China, and India. However, there are many countries whose primary energy production exceeds their primary energy consumption.
Now let's move on to another important indicator: the ratio of production and consumption of refined oil products. We should not forget that oil is still the main energy raw material in the world, accounting for 34% of the total energy mix.
If the volume of petroleum product production from a country's domestic oil resources is insufficient to meet its consumers' needs, this indicates energy dependence. The map presented here shows the ratio of crude oil production to petroleum product consumption by countries. In most countries with a deficit in refined petroleum consumption, the volume of primary energy consumption exceeds the volume of their own production, but there are some exceptions. For example, Mongolia shows a significant excess of primary energy production over its domestic consumption. However, this is solely due to the high levels of coal extraction. At the same time, petroleum products are almost entirely imported. Therefore, Mongolia cannot be classified as an energy-independent country. The situation is similar in Australia. This country has a significant surplus in the production of natural gas and coal compared to their consumption. The country also has record uranium reserves. However, Australia has only limited oil reserves, and net oil product imports are over 90% or about 26% of the total primary consumption. That's a lot. Of course, it's possible to replace oil imports, for example, using gas to liquid technology. However, it is expensive, complicated, and not today or tomorrow.
The situation in the United States is more complex. Crude oil net imports are estimated to be between 12 to 14.5%. On the other hand, net oil product exports are growing significantly, amounting to about 20% of the total production. It should also be taken into account that the United States is the largest producer of crude oil in the world.
The import of crude oil into the US is primarily driven by the need for heavy crude oil for refining, although domestic production consists mainly of light crude oil. However, this issue can be addressed by retrofitting existing refineries.
For this reason, we classify the US as energy independent and Australia as energy dependent. Additionally, for the same reason, we have excluded countries like Indonesia, Laos and Bolivia from further consideration. Another indicator of energy independence is the level of electrification and the per capita electricity consumption. Ubiquitous access to electricity is essential for meeting modern energy standards.
Ever-present access to electricity is essential for meeting modern energy standards. Some countries with rich fossil resources have low electrification rates. For example, in Nigeria, the electrification rate is less than 61%. In Mozambique, it is just over 33%, and in Chad, it is below 12%.
With the global average electricity consumption of around 3.5 megawatt-hour per capita, many countries have consumption levels much lower than this. In Angola, it is 0.4 megawatt-hour per capita, in Cameroon 0.3, in Ghana 0.55, in the Republic of Congo 0.46, in Mozambique 0.4, in Nigeria 0.14, and in South Sudan 0.05.
All the countries highlighted on this map have been excluded from further consideration due to insufficient access to electricity for their consumers.
In many countries, natural gas and coal are still essential for the production of electricity and heat.
Some countries have significant net natural gas imports and net coal imports, which may indicate their energy dependence.
There is a noticeable deficit between production and consumption of natural gas in the United Arab Emirates, Iraq and Kuwait. In terms of primary energy consumption, this deficit amounts to 9, 11 and 14% respectively. Despite this, all of these countries are large oil producers and have substantial natural gas reserves. Given these factors, we have included these countries in our rating.
Some countries have a similar situation with regard to energy coal, such as Azerbaijan, Norway and Brazil are net coal importers. However, the share of coal consumption in the energy sector in these countries is minimal or missing.
Malaysia has a significant imbalance between coal consumption and production. The net coal import volume exceeds 90% or around 17% of primary energy consumption. Currently, substitution of this raw material is problematic. Based on this, we have classified Malaysia as an energy-dependent country. As a result of preliminary data processing, the countries remaining in our final list are Algeria, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Ecuador, Gabon, Iran, Iraq, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Libya, Norway, Oman, Qatar, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Trinidad and Tobago, Turkmenistan, the United Arab Emirates, the USA and Venezuela. Due to their relatively small populations and inconsistent statistics, we have not included Guyana and Brunei in our rating. To calculate the final ranking, we have prepared two intermediate rankings: primary resources ranking and energy consumption ranking. The primary resources ranking evaluates the absolute level of primary energy resources in the participating countries, including reserves of crude oil, natural gas and coal, as well as the capacity of renewable sources, nuclear capacity and uranium reserves.
Russia received the highest score in this ranking, leading in the natural gas and nuclear energy categories. In addition, Russia has high indicators of coal and crude oil reserves. The United States ranked second with leading position in the categories of coal and capacity of renewable energy sources. Iran secured third place in terms of points. The top 10 countries in this ranking also include Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Iraq, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait.
The energy consumption ranking evaluates the accessibility of end consumers to key energy products based on the following indicators: ratio of primary energy production to consumption, energy consumption per GDP and per capita, electricity and refined petroleum consumption, and the ratio of renewable consumption to total consumption. Additionally, considering the climate agenda, we included the indicator of carbon dioxide emissions per capita.
Norway secured the undisputed first place in this ranking. The top 10 countries in this ranking also include Qatar, Kuwait, Gabon, Saudi Arabia, Canada, the United Arab Emirates, the USA, Bahrain, and Brazil.
Finally, based on the two intermediate rankings, we compiled our final ranking of countries in the world by energy independence.
The top 3 positions in this ranking with an equal number of points are held by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. The top 10 countries also included Canada, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Norway, Russia, Brazil, Venezuela. Venezuela, a global leader in oil reserves with 303.8 billion barrels, also has significant natural gas reserves. However, the level of specific consumption of final energy products in Venezuela is relatively low. Brazil has good oil and uranium reserves, excellent hydroelectric resources. The country is one of the world leaders in bioethanol production. There are significant coal and shale gas resources. The infrastructure for processing primary resources is at the world average. Russia tops the primary resources ranking, holding the position of a global leader in natural gas reserves along with significant oil and coal reserves. Russia is also one of the leaders in uranium enrichment. However, in the energy consumption ranking, some of Russia's indicators are noticeably below average. As a result, Russia has ranked number 7 together with Norway with the same number of points scored. Norway is the only Western European country represented in our ranking. The country has an excellent mix of fossil and renewable resources. Norway has the best indicators of consumption of final energy products. The country is the leader in specific consumption of electricity. The United Arab Emirates has substantial oil and gas reserves, excellent solar resources. The latest technologies are used to extract and transform them. The country has a modern infrastructure for processing primary resources into final consumer energy products. Kuwait has significant oil reserves exceeding 100 billion barrels, or about 6% of the world's total. Kuwait has a very high per capita energy consumption, including electricity and refined petroleum. However, its use of renewable energy sources is quite modest. Canada has excellent oil and uranium reserves and a variety of renewable resources. Canada produces almost twice as much primary resources as it consumes. The country has a developed energy infrastructure and a high level of specific consumption of final energy products. The United States, along with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, received the same number of points in our final ranking. So all of these countries are given rank number 1. In the primary resources ranking, the United States ranked second, slightly behind Russia. The United States is also the world leader in oil and natural gas production. However, the United States has a significant dependence on enriched uranium for nuclear power plants. In terms of specific consumption of various energy products, the United States does not have a leading position, but is always among the most developed countries in these indicators. Saudi Arabia is one of the world leaders in terms of proven oil reserves, second only to Venezuela. In addition, the country has considerable natural gas reserves. The country has a highly developed infrastructure for the extraction and distribution of energy products. Saudi Arabia is the world leader in refined petroleum consumption. The final rank of Saudi Arabia is number 1 together with Qatar and the USA. Qatar has about 12% of the world's natural gas reserves. Today, this country is also one of the world's leaders in the production of liquefied natural gas. In addition, Qatar is the absolute leader in energy consumption per capita. Qatar's final rank is number 1, along with Saudi Arabia and the United States. Ranks 11 to 23 are held by Iran, Iraq, Gabon, Libya, Kazakhstan, Ecuador, Colombia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Oman, Algeria, Turkmenistan, and Trinidad and Tobago.
We are clearly aware that there are some controversial points in the methodology of calculating our rating. However, fully accounting for all the factors that influence the calculation of the rating is not an easy task. We will be grateful for any feedback on this study, which we hope will help create an even more convincing product.